to the Secrets of Happily Ever After. I'm super excited to be chatting with a new friend, Suzette Halterman, who specializes in mixed faith marriages and helping couples collaborate and connect around their biggest differences. She trained in couples work with the Relationship School, the Gottman Institute, and the Couples Institute. She loves spending time in the outdoors of the small Colorado mountain town where she lives with her husband and her 4 children. Welcome, Suzette. How are you?
Good. Thank you. It's exciting to be here.
Good. I'm so glad you're here. And this is such a great topic. So I'm so excited to get into it. But first, I'm going to ask you the same question I'm asking all the experts in this summit, which is if you had the undivided attention of all the married couples in all the world for just a few minutes, what's the most important concept you could teach them about how to live happily ever after with your spouse?
So I would want to teach people how to manage their differences because I feel like differences are a huge part of any relationship, especially long-term committed relationships. More and more differences emerge. So I feel like if couples can do that part well, they're going to thrive. And if they're not doing that part well, if they're not managing their differences well, they're going to be stuck. They're going to have some dysfunctional patterns. It's going to be problematic. So I feel like if couples can master that, they're going to be set, and the relationship will be able to handle a lot more stress, a lot more intimacy, a lot more of everything.
Well, that's awesome. And you've had some incredible training. That's really exciting from the Gottman Institute and so many others. So, how did you get started specializing in specifically mixed faith marriages?
Yeah. So I was kind of doing this training to work with couples. And I went through my own faith transition. I grew up LDS. My husband was LDS. We married. We were, our paths, our belief systems were very similar. I went through my own faith shift, and all of a sudden we had these different belief systems, and that's not how our marriage started. And our differences really started to kind of be accentuated. Like even in the political sphere, like I was suddenly very different politically. I had become kind of this feminist. I wasn't like that before. We were very different people all of a sudden. And even though I was like trained to work with couples, it was still this like, we are so different. How do we make this work? Feeling that I had. And so I was seeking out additional training to help myself, and also to help the other couples that I was working with. So that's kind of how I landed in this. And then I just grew to love mixed faith marriages because I just feel like those are couples who are just on this developmental edge of like having to learn these really mature relationship skills. And it's so exciting. I feel like they don't even know what they're sitting on. They're sitting on this like gold mine of opportunity to learn and grow and push their relationship into a deeper, more meaningful, connected relationship. And so I love that field. I love that specialty because I feel like it makes such a difference. And I just love helping couples learn how to manage their differences, and seeing how they can see that, oh, we're two different people and we can still feel really connected. We can still thrive. Like that's so satisfying to help people in that process and for them to experience that. So I love it. It's my favorite thing.
That's so cool. And it's really interesting because I just released a podcast episode about strengthening your spiritual intimacy. And I talk
Mhm.
about that. I really love working with couples that are of different or mixed faiths as well. And I don't see it as a big tragedy when one couple has one partner has stepped outside the faith. I feel like it's such a great opportunity to learn so much more about each other. And I love the way you put it, learning how to manage those differences, whether you believe the same way or not. There's so many differences, right? And I think that the opportunity to be married to somebody who's different than you pushes you, and you get to learn how to um, interact with somebody who's very different from you, which is a skill you can use everywhere. So
Oh yeah.
I do think what an exciting specialty. I really love that you do that. um, what would you say is the biggest issue that couples in a mixed faith marriage face?
Yeah, I think it's they don't know how to compromise effectively. That's one of them. Um, I feel like compromise, doing it intentionally and doing it well, is a skill set that we're just not taught. So a lot of people, they just kind of throw something out there like, I'll sacrifice this so you can get what you want just to like keep the peace. and then they end up resentful. It doesn't work. It's still, it's still kind of dysfunctional, and they're not peaceful. So I feel like that's the biggest thing. The Gottmans. So I learned how to compromise when I studied with the Gottmans, and I was like, how did I know this before? Like, how did I get to be 40 and not know how to do compromise well? Like, this should be taught to elementary school kids, right? So they have a method, they call it the donut method, where the first thing you do is figure out the middle of the donut, which is your core needs, like the parts of you, the thing that you just can't compromise on because you feel like you'd just be losing like part of your heart and soul. Like it would be too painful to compromise around that. So that's what you do first. And that takes a lot of sorting out, which is why people don't do that, because it's hard work to sort out, like, what is my core need here? Like, why is this so important to me? Deep down, what's this all about? Like, sometimes it takes me months to really get to the root of like, okay, this is what this is about, and sorting it out. So first you got to find the core need for both people, and that's the middle of the donut. And then the outer part of the donut is all the areas you can be flexible around. So like, this is my core need. So for example, in my own mixed faith marriage, we have to compromise around how to raise our kids, how to teach our kids religious stuff. The core issue for me is I want my kids to feel empowered. That comes from my own experiences of feeling disempowered in a lot of different ways. That's my core need. It took me months to figure that out, right? My husband's core need is character building. He had a lot of great experiences in the church that built character. That's super important to him. He cannot compromise on that. He wants our kids to have character building experiences. I want our kids to be empowered. So we've got our core needs, but there's a lot of areas around those core needs that we can be flexible around. Like, I can be totally flexible around what we do and how we do it and when we do it, as long as my kids feel empowered, as long as I can honor that core need. And my husband is super flexible around a lot of things, as long as our kids can have some character building experiences. So the solutions present themselves once you have the core need figured out and all the flexible areas figured out. Then it's like, oh, I see how our goals are actually really similar. I see how we can make this work, and compromise is easy. But if you don't do it that way, if you're just throwing stuff out there to make the peace, and both people don't feel honored in their core needs, because that's the goal. You got to find something that honors both core needs. Then your compromise isn't going to work. So I feel like that's what most mixed faith marriages and most couples with differences are struggling with, is they just don't know how to compromise. They haven't taken the time to really sit down and learn about each other's core needs and sort that out, to make effective compromises that actually work and make both people feel like, oh, like, this is good. Like, this honors me. This is a win-win for both of us.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I almost bristle at the word compromise, because I feel like when people hear the word compromise, the very first thing they think of is, I have to give something up here.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so
Sacrifice. I have to sacrifice.
exactly. Like, marriage requires sacrifice. What do I have to give up, right? And so I don't use the word compromise very much, but you said it at the end, the win-win, right? If you figure out the middle of that donut, you can come up with the win-win. Like, it's like all the other things that are secondary to what is really important to you. So I love that, because I don't think that people should ever have to sacrifice the middle of that donut.
Exactly. And getting to the middle of the donut, that's half the battle. But once you have that, like, then it's really easy. And yeah, I think the goal is a win-win. And most couples just aren't used to doing that, because they don't have models of, they haven't seen that being done, that there's effective win-wins when you have two different people, right? Because it's just a skill you don't know, but it's a skill that can be learned. And you get quicker. Like, I'm getting a lot quicker in my own marriage of like, here's my middle of my donut, and my husband's getting faster, it just takes practice, really.
Yeah, and I think that's really valuable to name that in front of your kids, right? Like, this is
Yes.
what's really important to mom, and this is what's really important to dad. And I love the idea that, like, maybe there's not like the veto power, like one partner is more powerful than the other, and so what they say goes, right? It's like, we always take into consideration both people's core value, the middle of both people's donut. And when we name that, then it's like, one person isn't wearing pants or making the final say. It's like, we both get honored in what we feel is really important, then we find a way to marry those together.
Exactly. And if it doesn't honor both people, it's not a compromise. That's just a sacrifice, or a
Arbitrary
unhealthy
thing.
relationship is what
Sure. Right. something where one person is going to end up resentful no matter what.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not true compromise. True compromise is always a win-win. It honors the core needs, it honors the donut, the middle of the donut.
I love that. And I love donuts. Now my stomach is rumbling. So how do you suggest that couples in mixed faith marriages communicate about how to teach the kids? Because I think that's the biggest thing is people get so nervous, like, well, I want to do it this way, and you want to do it this way, and what do we teach our children?
Yeah. So I think it all boils down to compromise again, but I think even bigger than that is creating a relationship that makes room for two people.
Mhm.
And same thing, like not having to sacrifice. Or I think in a lot of mixed faith marriages, it seems like, oh, if I'm going to be supportive of my spouse who's maybe a member, that means I just need to send my kids to church and I have to not say anything, right? But not saying anything is not always a healthy relationship. So you can be supportive by um, collaborating and teaching your kids in ways that work for both people. So it's the same idea of compromise. It's the same idea of win-win. What works for you and for me? We might have to get really creative. And the sense of I want to honor myself and honor my spouse. So I'm going to speak up for what's important to me. I'm not just going to say, oh, I have to be supportive and I have to keep my mouth shut. Like, no, I'm going to support myself and honor myself, and I'm going to honor my spouse. And so it's just a matter of getting creative. We in our family we use Uplift Kids, which is a non-denominational program to teach our kids spiritual values. Like there's a lot of ways to do it that kind of can honor both people and be respectful, and a lot of compromise. Like maybe you send the kids to church sometimes and on other weeks you do something else. There's a lot of ways to teach kids, but I think the mentality has to be we always go for a win-win. We support ourselves and we support each other, and we speak up about what's important to us. So you have to make room for that in your relationship, um, which means bringing your own voice out and honoring your spouse's voice. And so that's really the work that has to be done, is can we expand our relationship to make room for both of these voices equally?
Yeah, that's so good. So I worked with a couple recently and they would go to church every other week. And
Mhm.
I felt like that was super arbitrary. Like it wasn't really a good solution to the problem that they were facing. So what would you say to a couple who is like, yeah, we've got it figured out. We just go every other week.
Yeah. So I would say they probably haven't done the work to get to their core needs. Like, why are they going? What do they want to get out of that? Are they just wanting the community? Like for a lot of people, their core need is community.
Mhm.
I want to build community. So that might look like I want my kids to be involved in young men, young women's, church programs that build community, but I don't care so much about, the lessons, whatever. I'm there more for community. So they probably haven't figured out their core needs. And so they're just throwing something out there like, let's go every other week. Well, are you honoring both needs on the weeks that you're not going? What are you doing? What core need are you meeting? Is it because the core need there is other experiences? Like, are you going to other churches because your core need is to like expose your family to more? Or is the core need like, I need to be out in nature and like have more, internal spiritual experiences? Like, so I think I would recommend with that couple to really spend the time digging deep to figure out what their core needs are, instead of just making up some arbitrary solution to make sure that you're really getting what you want out of it.
Yeah, so good. So good. So have you seen couples in mixed faith marriages truly live happily ever after? Because I know for me, when a couple comes to me and they're really worried about their spouse changing, it's
Mhm.
it feels like a very, very big chasm to overcome. Like they get really worried, like what's gonna happen to my family? What's my extended family gonna think? What's gonna happen to our kids? Are we gonna be able to stay married? So talk about that for a second. Have you seen it be successful? And what do you think are the steps like after that initial shock? Like, oh my gosh, my spouse is changing up the deal, right? How
Yeah.
do you move forward from there?
Yeah. So absolutely, I've seen it. And I think
You're
what,
living it, right?
yeah, I'm living it, and I see it. And and a mixed faith marriage is it's just a mixed belief marriage. And all marriages are mixed belief marriages, right? You might have different beliefs about money, about child discipline strategies. So all marriages are mixed belief. And you can have marriages that have a lot of the same beliefs that are horrible marriages. And you can have marriages with very different beliefs that are great marriages. And because we actually have research on what makes marriages thrive and not thrive, And differences are actually not, they're not relevant, that they're not part of it. So what makes relationships thrive has everything to do with developing relationship skills like managing conflict, learning to compromise, learning empathy, um, learning, to understand another person, to show mutual respect, all those things, that's what makes relationships thrive. So whether or not you have a similar belief system or a different belief system is actually irrelevant. And the research backs that up. Like, that's not just me saying that, that's just, we have the research. So this idea that, oh, mixed faith marriages, when somebody changes, that's so scary, that's just a socially constructed narrative that we've developed. And that's part of why I love doing what I'm doing, because I want to change that narrative so that that goes away, so that people don't freak out.
Right.
And they can just see like, oh, this is fine. We're fine. The other thing, because you asked, what do couples do when they feel that and that starts to happen, is um, I teach couples about the stages of relationships. And one of the stages, relationships over long term follow a very predictable pattern. And one of those stages is we are super different. We were the same and now we're different. Like, that happens in all relationships. They try to fight it, right? They try to pull back into sameness because that feels really good. But actually, the progression is to learn to tolerate differences and find a sense of unity that doesn't come from sameness, but that comes from like, I want to support you and I want to support myself. And I want to see you thrive and I want to see me thrive. Like, that's like here. So like, we're the same as here. And then there's this stage of like, oh, we have all these differences. How are we going to do this? And if you were learn to work in this stage, it'll move you into this stage, which is, oh, our differences actually add to what we're capable of doing and make our relationship stronger. So when you're in that stage of like, oh crap, like, how are we going to do this? Just relax and know you're normal and you're working on moving to the next stage, and not pull back into this stage of like, we have to be the same or else we're going to get divorced right now. Like, deal with this. It's hard. It's a learning curve. It's really uncomfortable, but it'll push you to here, which is way better, way more stable, way more intimate, emotionally connected, fulfilling, thriving relationship.
Yeah. And I like to think of differences in marriage as exciting and passionate, right? Like, how boring would it be to be married to your clone, right? I mean,
Oh my
that would
gosh.
be so boring, right? So like,
Yeah.
when you put it that way, it kind of brings it into perspective. Like, you married somebody who was completely different than you, and now for the rest of your life, you get to learn about those things. You get to like broaden your perspective and your understanding because your partner is so different from you. So that's,
Yeah.
it's like a bonus. It's like a plus. It's like exciting and passion filled.
Absolutely. And it doesn't feel that way when you're in it, because sometimes it's just hard to see the benefits. Like, how can different belief systems, different religious views help us? Like, how could that be a good thing? But later you can kind of see, oh, like, actually, this is really good for our kids. This is really good for us to think about things in different ways. And yeah, absolutely.
And I actually think when you're talking about in the religious sense, I think the religion that we were taught growing up is very kind of you just do it. And
Mhm.
so I think that when you have a different perspective, it causes you to question and to really search and, commit to a belief system that you understand more, not just like,
Yeah,
because I think, lazy obedience is just as bad as complete
right.
disobedience, right? You've got to know why you're following the rules.
Right. It gets you into more critical thinking and deeper conviction. Like, I love this part about my religion and that's why I follow it. Right. But you wouldn't have to think deeply about that if you didn't have kind of outside things
That's
making
great
you
for
think
kids.
differently.
Right, and
It's
that's
so
great to
great.
point out for kids too. Like, don't just do this because, I mean, when you're the parent, like, why do I have to do this? Because I said so, right? I mean, there's a difference between that and then growing into those really critical thinking skills. Like, this is helping me in these ways. And so
Yeah,
that's why I do this.
exactly. And you're teaching your kids to own the things that are important to them. Like, if they like certain aspects of certain religious things, for them to own that and be like, I like this part of it. This feels
Mhm.
good to me. It helps them develop their own sense of who they are, what they like, what they don't like, instead of, yeah, identity formation. It helps with identity formation.
So good. Oh, I love that so much. Will you tell them where they can find you and learn more about the work that you do?
Yeah, so my website is SuzetteHaltermanCoaching.com. And you can find more about my history, my story, and what I offer there. And I'm also on Instagram, Suzette Halterman, just Suzette Halterman, and Facebook, Suzette Halterman Coaching. So that's where I'm at.
Excellent. Well, thank you so, so much for the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you.
To learn more ways to deepen your intimacy and strengthen your relationship, make sure you watch this video next.